Ethan stepped off the landing ramp of the small transport ship and felt the warmth of the alien planet's twin suns brush against his face. The air smelled sweet like fresh rain mixed with flowers, though he could not recognize a single plant. In sight, he was exhausted from days of travel and the long negotiations that had led him here to this new world. The alien city spread out before him, built with smooth silver towers that curved upward like blades of grass and soft glowing lights that danced across the streets. He had never seen anything like it, but he was too tired to admire the view for long. Lara was waiting at the edge of the landing platform, her tall, slim figure dressed in the pale blue robes that marked her as a cultural guide. Her skin shimmered slightly under the sunlight, as though a thin layer of water always covered her body. She smiled at Ethan in the calm, friendly way he had come to expect from her kind, and gestured for him to follow. She spoke in fluent human language, though the accent was soft and melodic. "Welcome to our home," she said. "We are honored by your arrival. You must be tired and in need of rest." Ethan nodded without a word and simply followed as she led him through the wide corridors of the main complex. The hallways were full of aliens walking side by side, laughing softly and speaking in their strange musical language. They glanced at Ethan with curiosity, but there was no hostility, only a calm kind of interest. Lyra explained as they walked that the community valued hospitality above all else, and that visitors were always treated as one of their own. She mentioned that he would be sharing the common quarters with others, not just his own room, but also the facilities where they lived, ate, and relaxed. Ethan only half listened. He was thinking of how badly he wanted to wash off the sweat and grime from days spent in cramped starships. Finally, Lyra stopped at a large double door made of the same smooth silver metal as the towers outside. She touched a panel, and the doors opened with a soft sound, revealing a bright open space inside. Ethan stepped forward and froze. It was not a bedroom or lounge as he expected, but a vast chamber filled with steam and the sound of running water. There were pools carved into the ground glowing faintly with warmth, and dozens of aliens were inside washing their bodies and chatting casually as though it was the most normal thing in the world. Ethan blinked hard, thinking he had misunderstood. Lyra smiled gently and said, "This is where we clean ourselves before entering the living quarters. You will join us now. It is important. You must be cleansed after travel." He felt a sudden wave of discomfort rise inside him. He had grown up with privacy, with personal showers and closed doors. Never had he even considered bathing in front of strangers, let alone aliens. Yet everyone in the chamber seemed completely at ease. They moved slowly in the warm pools, rinsing away soap and laughing together. No one appeared embarrassed or shy. It was clear that this was a deeply normal part of their culture. Ethan turned to Lyra and hesitated. "I do not think this is for me," he said quietly. "I can clean myself in private somewhere." Lyra tilted her head as though confused by the request. "Private?" She repeated the word softly, as if it was foreign to her. "This is the way we all live together. It is part of our trust in one another. There are no secrets here." She stepped closer and without any awkwardness said, "Human, it is normal to bathe together here. Shall I scrub your back?" The word struck Ethan harder than he expected, and he looked around at the many eyes that had now turned toward him, not in judgment, but in curiosity, waiting to see what he would do. He felt sweat forming on his forehead. Though the air was warm and wet, the idea of letting someone else wash him, someone he barely knew, in front of so many others made his heart race. Yet he realized in that moment that refusing might offend them and create distance between himself and the very people he had come to work with. He swallowed hard and shook his head. "No, I will manage," he said quickly. But even as he spoke, he saw the look of confusion and perhaps even a touch of hurt in Lyra's face. It was not anger, simply a lack of understanding. She stepped back slightly and gave him space. Though her eyes lingered on him, as though trying to read his thoughts, Ethan stared at the pools and the steam rising from the warm water and wondered what kind of world he had stepped into, where such openness was not just accepted, but expected. Lyra's voice was soft again. "You have traveled far. Your body must be weary." The water will help you feel alive again. It will also help the others know you are one of us." Ethan hesitated. He did not want to offend his hosts. He had seen enough first-contact disasters caused by cultural misunderstandings to know how serious this could be. He looked down at his hands, dirty and calloused from weeks on the ship, and then looked at the peaceful aliens who welcomed him without hesitation. In that moment, Ethan felt trapped between two choices: hold on to his human sense of privacy, or step into a tradition that was completely foreign to him. He knew that whatever he chose would shape how these people saw him. From this point forward, he took a deep breath and finally nodded slowly. He could feel his heart beating faster as Lyra smiled again, not the forced smile of diplomacy, but something warmer and genuine. She gestured toward the nearest pool, and Ethan walked forward one step at a time, his mind racing with questions and uncertainty. The steam wrapped around him like a soft blanket, and he could hear the gentle splash of water as others moved aside to give him space. He stood at the edge staring at the rippling surface, unsure if he was ready for what came next. Ethan stood at the edge of the warm pool, his heart beating fast and his throat dry as if he had walked into some silent test. He was not ready to face the aliens nearby. Moved without any shame or discomfort. They were washing themselves in groups, scrubbing each other's backs, talking and laughing softly, their voices echoing in the large chamber. It felt strange for him to see how naturally they touched and trusted one another. He looked over his shoulder at Lyra, who was standing patiently waiting for him to decide, her calm eyes full of quiet encouragement. Ethan slowly stepped into the water and felt the warmth spread over his legs. It was soothing, yet his nervousness refused to fade. The water reached his waist, and he hesitated, unsure of what to do next. Lyra joined him without hesitation, stepping into the pool. With fluid movements, she came closer, but not so close as to make him retreat. She spoke in her soft, melodic voice. "You are safe here, human. You do not need to be afraid. We are a people who believe in living without barriers. The bath is not about seeing each other's bodies. It is about showing that we trust one another." Her words made Ethan think of how different human culture was, at least the one he knew. People built walls around themselves, doors, locks, and private spaces, everything designed to keep others out. Yet here on this world, those walls did not seem to exist. He felt exposed, but at the same time curious, because the alien seemed free of the awkwardness he was drowning in. Lyra picked up a smooth stone covered in a natural foaming substance and gently held it out to him. "This will help clean the travel from your skin," she said. But her voice was not commanding, only offering. Ethan accepted the stone and began scrubbing his arms and shoulders. The foam had a sweet scent, like a mixture of mint and warm earth, that eased the tension in his muscles a little while he worked. Lyra reached behind him and said, "May I help you with your back?" He stiffened for a moment, but then realized that it was exactly the thing she had offered before, and refusing again would only make things worse, so he nodded quietly. She moved closer and placed her hands lightly against his back, using the stone to gently wash away the grime of his long journey. It was strange at first, and Ethan wanted to pull away, but as the moments passed, he felt a calmness slowly settle over him. Lyra's touch was professional and respectful, not the way he feared it might feel. She simply worked in silence, occasionally speaking to explain that this custom was very old and came from a time when her people had no individual homes, only shared shelters, where everyone depended on each other for survival. "When we bathe together," she said, "we remember that we are part of something larger than ourselves, that we must care for one another as we care for our own bodies." Ethan listened and realized that there was wisdom in her words. He thought of how humans often lived apart, guarding their own space, rarely letting anyone get too close. Maybe that was why so many people back home felt lonely or mistrustful. He closed his eyes for a moment and let himself relax into the warm water. It felt as if a weight he had been carrying for days was slowly lifting. He noticed the others around him were watching with soft smiles, not mocking but welcoming, and that made his chest feel a little lighter. As they continued bathing together, Lyra began to tell him about the other customs of her people, how they ate at one long table every evening, how they shared the work of cooking and cleaning, how children were raised by the whole community, not just their parents. Ethan was surprised by how open they were with one another, how little concern they seemed to have for personal ownership and privacy. It was the complete opposite of what he knew, yet he could see how strong it made them, because no one ever felt alone or forgotten. When the bath was done, Lyra handed Ethan a soft woven cloth to dry himself. He stepped out of the pool and felt clean in a way that was more than physical. It was as if some part of him had been washed too. He looked at Lyra, and for the first time he smiled, a real unguarded smile. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded and replied, "You are welcome. Human, it pleases me that you chose to share this moment with us. Now you are truly among us." As they dressed in simple clean robes provided for guests, Lyra leaned closer and spoke in a serious tone. "Soon another group of humans will arrive from your world. They will not understand our ways any better than you did, and they may refuse the bath. I fear they will see our traditions as strange or even insulting." Ethan felt a ripple of concern, because he knew how easily such misunderstandings could lead to distrust or even conflict. Lyra touched his arm gently and said, "You have experienced this. Now you can help them see that we mean no harm." Ethan nodded, though he felt a heavy sense of responsibility settle in his chest. He had only just begun to understand the meaning behind this custom, and now he was expected to explain it to others who might be even more stubborn than he had been. Yet he also knew she was right, because if the humans rejected the tradition, it could damage the fragile bond between their species. As they left the bathing chamber and walked through the glowing corridors, Ethan thought about how strange it was that something as simple as sharing water could carry such deep meaning. He remembered the words Lyra had spoken about trust and unity, and he realized that maybe this planet had something to teach humanity, something they desperately needed. By the time they reached the common quarters, the suns outside were beginning to set, casting a golden light through the tall crystal windows. The aliens gathered together to eat and talk, their laughter filling the room. Ethan stood among them, feeling more at ease than he would have believed possible when he first stepped off the ship. Yet he knew this was only the beginning. There was much more to learn, and even more to share with those who would arrive next. Ethan woke the next morning to the gentle sound of soft chimes that echoed through the common quarters. The air was warm and carried a sweet fragrance from the gardens outside the crystal walls. He opened his eyes slowly, and for a moment forgot where he was. Then the memories of the day before returned. They shared bath, the voices of the aliens, the way they had welcomed him so openly, despite his hesitation. He sat up from the woven mat and stretched his arms, feeling lighter than he had felt in weeks. As he stepped out of the sleeping chamber, Lyra was already waiting in the hallway, her calm expression brightened by a smile. She greeted him warmly and said, "You rested well, human?" He nodded and followed her through the wide corridor where the other aliens were beginning their day. Some were carrying baskets of fruit, others were talking softly as they prepared the communal breakfast. Lyra explained that every morning they gathered together for the first meal of the day, because it reminded them that they were one community, not many separate lives. Ethan listened and noticed how no one seemed rushed or distracted. Everyone moved with purpose, but also with patience. When they reached the great dining hall, he was invited to sit at the long table among the others. He felt their eyes on him, but not in a way that made him uneasy. It was curiosity and kindness. They offered him fruits with golden skins and bread made from grains he had never seen before. The taste was unlike anything on earth, rich and sweet, yet soft and light. As he ate, Lyra told him that the human delegation was scheduled to arrive later that day, and that the leaders of her people hoped for a warm welcome, but also feared that the visitors might misunderstand the customs, just as Ethan had at first. Ethan felt the weight of what she was saying. He remembered his own reaction to the shared bathing tradition, and how close he had come to rejecting it. He understood now why Lyra believed his experience could help guide the others if they refused to adapt. It could harm the fragile trust between the two species after the meal. Lyra took him to the gardens where children played in the sunlight, and elders tended to glowing plants that released soft colors into the air. It was peaceful in a way that reminded Ethan of a world without fear or division. As they walked, Lyra spoke quietly about how her people viewed trust as the foundation of everything they did. She said that when one person hid too much from the others, it created distance, and distance eventually became suspicion. This was why they shared so much of their daily lives, from eating together, to bathing together, to raising children in one collective family. Ethan thought about how different it was from Earth, where people often built walls around themselves, both real and emotional. He wondered how humans would ever adjust to such openness later. That afternoon, the sound of approaching engines filled the sky, and everyone looked upward. A sleek human ship descended onto the landing platform. Ethan felt his heartbeat quicken as the ramp lowered and 4 humans stepped out wearing clean-pressed uniforms. They looked around with guarded expressions, the same kind he had probably worn when he first arrived. The leader of the group, a tall man with sharp eyes, introduced himself as Captain Hao, and made it clear from his tone that he intended to maintain control of the situation. Lyra greeted them warmly and invited them into the main complex. She explained that they would be shown to the common quarters, but first they would be asked to cleanse themselves from the long journey. Captain Holly frowned and said firmly that his team was fine and that they did not require any special treatment. Ethan felt a spark of worry because he could already see where this was heading. He stepped forward and tried to explain gently that it was not about treatment or comfort. It was about tradition and respect for the hosts. The captain looked at Ethan with surprise and a hint of suspicion. "You seem awfully comfortable here for someone who just arrived yesterday," he said. Ethan met his gaze and replied, "I was not comfortable at first, but I learned that their ways are not about embarrassment, they are about trust. If we reject their customs, it will send the wrong message to people who have done nothing but welcome us." Hale seemed unconvinced, but Lyra led them toward the bathing chamber. Anyway, the other humans followed reluctantly, whispering among themselves. Ethan walked beside them quietly. He could feel their discomfort growing as they stepped into the large, steamy room, where dozens of aliens were already washing in the pools. The humans froze just as he had frozen the first time, and their faces turned tense and guarded. Lyra explained gently that the bath was a way to wash away the dust of travel and to show that they were ready to live together as equals. Captain Hale crossed his arms and said, "This is not how we do things on Earth. We have private facilities, and we prefer to keep them private." Ethan could feel the tension building. The aliens watched silently, waiting for a reaction, and he knew he had to act before the situation turned cold. He stepped closer to the captain and spoke in a calm voice. "I know it feels strange, but believe me, I felt the same. I wanted to walk away, but if I had, it would have set a wall between me and them. I do not want you to make the same mistake. This is not about control, it is about trust. If we want to work with them, we have to meet them halfway." Hale stared at Ethan for a long moment, clearly struggling with the idea. He looked around at the aliens who were watching quietly, and then at his team who were shifting uneasily. Finally, he sighed and said, "We will do this, but I do not like it." Ethan nodded, grateful for the small step forward. He knew it would not be easy for any of them, but at least they had agreed. As they began to remove their heavy uniforms and step toward the water, Ethan stayed nearby, ready to guide them, just as Lyra had guided him. He knew the coming moments would shape the future of the relationship between the two species, and that what happened in this warm, steamy chamber could mean the difference between trust and division. He hoped they would see what he had seen that day, that sharing something so simple could bring them closer than any treaty ever could. The warm steam of the bathing chamber filled the air and wrapped itself around everyone. As the humans stepped hesitantly toward the glowing pools, their movements stiff and awkward, as if they were walking into some unfamiliar trial, Ethan stood close enough to see the uncertainty written across their faces. He could feel the tension building like a weight pressing on the room. Captain Holly was the first to kneel at the edge of the water. His jaw set as though he was forcing himself to endure something unpleasant. The other humans followed, his lead removing their heavy boots and uniforms slowly, their eyes flicking nervously toward the aliens who were already in the pools, washing one another's backs and shoulders with the same casual trust. Ethan had learned to understand. Lyra stepped forward and welcomed them with a smile, her voice soft and calming. She explained once more how this tradition was about unity, how the water cleansed not only the body, but also the invisible barriers that could grow between strangers. The captain gave a curt nod, though his posture showed he was still unconvinced. The humans entered the water, one by one, the heat rising around them, as if the pool itself wanted to test their resolve. They stood close together, keeping distance from the aliens, who were clearly trying to respect their space, but Ethan could feel the divide growing like an unseen wall. He moved closer to Holly and spoke in a low voice. "Remember what I told you. They are watching to see if we will accept their ways. If we hesitate or refuse now, we risk more than our pride." Holly did not reply at first. His eyes were fixed on an alien standing nearby, whose skin shimmered under the light as they rinsed their arms with a glowing stone. Finally, Holly muttered, "We are not used to this, Ethan. I am trying, but it feels wrong." Ethan understood. He had felt exactly the same when he first stepped into the pool, but he also knew how much could be lost if this failed. Lyra approached carefully, holding out one of the smooth stones covered in foam, her expression open, and without pressure. She looked at the captain and asked, "May I help you wash your back, as is our custom?" The question hung in the air for a long moment. Hale's hands tightened at his sides, but before he could refuse, Ethan stepped forward and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. "Let me go first," he said. Holly looked at him uncertain, but Ethan turned and let Lyra scrub his back. The sensation was no longer strange to him now. It felt like a simple act of trust, and he wanted the others to see that it was harmless. The aliens around them began to speak softly, sharing stories of how the tradition began, how it had kept their people united through centuries of hardship. One elder spoke of the time when they lived in caves, and how the bath pools had been the only safe place to gather and warm themselves after cold nights. Another told of how enemies had once been invited into the pools to show that there was no longer enmity in their hearts. Ethan listened and saw the expressions on the human faces begin to change slightly, their stiffness softening, though they still clung to their unease. One of the younger humans, a woman named Claire, finally spoke quietly. "I will try," she said, and stepped toward one of the alien attendants, who greeted her with a soft smile. The alien gently helped her wash her back and shoulders, and Claire let out a small breath of surprise, as if realizing it was not as frightening as she thought. The other humans watched this moment and slowly followed her example, allowing the aliens to assist them. The air in the chamber seemed to grow lighter as voices rose in cautious conversation. Ethan felt relief wash over him as he saw the small gap between the two groups begin to close. Holly, however, remained tense. He stood in the water with his arms folded until Lyra approached him again. She said softly, "Captain, you lead your people. They will follow what they see in you." Holly hesitated, his eyes darting toward his crew, and then toward Ethan, who gave him a steady nod. Finally he sighed and allowed Lyra to help him. The moment her hands touched his back, his shoulders stiffened, but she moved with quiet respect, and he seemed to slowly relax. As the bath continued, the humans began to ask questions about the culture. The aliens answered with patience, explaining that this was only one of many traditions designed to remind them of their connection to each other. They spoke of the long meals shared at one table and the way every member of the community contributed to raising children. Ethan watched his fellow humans listening and realized they were beginning to understand the meaning behind these customs. Maybe not fully, but enough to see they were not strange or invasive, only different. When the bathing was complete, everyone stepped from the pools, feeling lighter and cleaner than when they had arrived. The humans were given the same soft robes Ethan had worn the day before and led into the great hall for the evening meal. This time they did not sit apart from the aliens. They joined the long table, and though they were still quiet at first, they soon began to speak with the others, asking questions. And even sharing some laughter. Ethan sat near Holly, who leaned closer and whispered, "You were right, this was necessary." "I can see that now," Ethan nodded, knowing that this small success was only the beginning. The humans would have to continue adapting if they were to build real trust, but at least they had taken the first step. As the meal continued, the room was filled with warmth and light. The aliens passed bowls of glowing fruit and bread down the table. The humans reached for the food without hesitation, and the gap between them seemed to shrink even further. Lyra caught Ethan's eye from across the table and gave him a grateful smile. He returned it quietly, glad that he had been able to help, though deep inside he wondered how long this fragile understanding would last. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, because change never came easily, but for the moment he allowed himself to feel hope. The suns had set outside, leaving the towers of the city glowing softly in the night sky. When the meal ended, the humans followed their hosts to the common quarters. This time there was less tension in their steps, less need to keep themselves separate. Ethan felt a sense of accomplishment, but also a deep responsibility, because he knew that one misstep could undo everything they had achieved, and he was determined not to let that happen. The next morning the humans woke early in the common quarters, the soft chimes filling the air once again, but this time the sound felt different. It no longer carried the weight of unfamiliarity, it carried a sense of belonging. Ethan rose from his mat and looked around the wide room, noticing how the other humans moved more freely than they had the day before. They no longer kept themselves at a distance from the aliens. Some were speaking quietly with their hosts, already learning more about the customs of this world. Ethan felt a quiet satisfaction, but he knew that their journey of trust was not complete. There was still much to do. Lyra appeared in the doorway as the sunlight poured in through the high crystal windows, her calm expression the same, but there was warmth in her eyes. She approached Ethan and spoke in her soft, melodic voice. "Today, we gather for the council meeting. The leaders of both our people will discuss the path forward. Your presence will be important, because you have experienced what trust can create." Ethan nodded and followed her through the winding corridors, the humans walking close behind now, without the same stiffness that had marked their first steps through these halls. Council chamber was vast, with a domed ceiling that shimmered as if holding a piece of the sky itself. Alien elders sat in a circle at one side, their forms graceful and serene. The human delegation took seats opposite them. Captain Hale sat at the center, his expression thoughtful yet still guarded. Ethan stood near the back, observing the way the two groups regarded each other. He could feel how fragile this moment was. One careless word could undo the fragile understanding they had built. The first elder spoke in a gentle tone, explaining how their people wished to open their world fully to the humans, to share knowledge and resources, but also to teach them the ways that had kept their society strong. Holly responded cautiously, saying that humanity valued partnership but needed time to understand these unfamiliar customs. Ethan stepped forward, then, knowing he could not stay silent, he spoke of what he had felt when he first arrived, how he had been afraid of their openness, and how the shared bath had changed his perspective. He explained that it was not about the act itself, but about what it symbolized: a willingness to lower walls and meet each other as equals. The aliens listened with quiet smiles, and the humans shifted in their seats, some nodding slightly as they recognized the truth in his words. Captain Hale looked at Ethan for a long moment, and then said softly, "He is right. Yesterday, I would have rejected your ways. Today, I see their purpose. We still need to adjust, but I believe we can learn." Ethan felt relief flood through him as he saw the tension in the room ease. The elders thanked Holly for his honesty and promised to be patient. They understood that change was not instant, and that trust had to grow slowly. When the meeting ended, both groups rose from their seats, and for the first time, there was no visible line separating them. The aliens approached the humans and spoke with them directly, offering to teach them about the culture in more detail. Some of the humans even asked questions of their own. Curious to know more, Ethan stood to one side watching the scene unfold and felt a deep sense of pride because he knew this was what they had all hoped for, real connection, not forced but chosen. That evening, the entire community gathered in the great hall, the long table filled with food that glowed softly under the lantern light. The humans sat among the aliens without hesitation, passing bowls of fruit and bread, sharing laughter that rang through the chamber. Ethan sat beside Lyra, who leaned toward him and whispered, "You have done much for your people and for ours today." He shook his head modestly and said, "I only followed what you taught me." She smiled and said, "Sometimes that is enough to change everything." After the meal, the elders announced that there would be a special ceremony at the bath pools to mark the beginning of their partnership. The humans followed willingly this time, stepping into the warm water without the hesitation that had once held them back. They let the aliens wash their backs and in turn offered to do the same. The steam rose around them, carrying away the last traces of mistrust. Ethan stood in the pool and felt an overwhelming sense of unity, as if the invisible walls that had separated them from one another were finally gone. "Captain." Holly approached Ethan in the water and said quietly, "I was wrong to doubt you. Thank you for reminding me what we came here to do." Ethan shook his head and replied, "We all had to learn together. That is what matters." The captain gave a rare smile, and for the first time Ethan felt that they truly stood on the same side. When the ceremony was complete and the water settled back into stillness, the aliens and humans stepped out of the pools together. The night sky above glittered with countless stars. The same stars that had once seemed so far away now felt closer than ever. Lyra stood beside Ethan and said softly, "Perhaps one day your people will teach us something new, just as we have taught you." Ethan looked up at the sky and thought of how small one world could be compared to the vastness of the galaxy, yet how powerful a single act of trust could become. As they walked back to the common quarters, Ethan felt at peace. He had arrived on this world uncertain and guarded, but he was leaving this moment with a heart open to something larger than himself. He glanced at the other humans who now laughed and spoke easily with their alien hosts, and he knew that the future would not be perfect. There would be challenges and misunderstandings still to come, but the foundation had been laid, and that was enough. The soft lights of the city towers glowed ahead, guiding them home, and Ethan smiled to himself, thinking of the journey that had brought him here. He remembered the words Lyra had spoken on that first day, "Human, it is normal to bathe together here. Shall I scrub your back?" And he realized how much meaning those simple words had carried. Now they were no longer strange. They were a reminder that trust begins with a choice. As he lay down that night beneath the gentle glow of the crystal ceiling, Ethan felt hope rising inside him like warm water filling a pool. He whispered quietly to himself, "Maybe this is how unity begins, not with grand speeches or powerful weapons, but with something small, something shared, something as simple as washing away the dust of old fears together." The end.